Hey up there. I want to start off by saying I've been overwhelmed by the number of emails that I've received over the last 2 or 3 weeks from people about the constraints that the political classes are placing on our motorcycle freedoms. Now, I would like to thank those people for getting in touch with me, because it proved to me that I'm not just overreacting. This is a very real problem that we're facing. And those emails serve to make me feel a lot less isolated in my views on what's going on. Now, to those people who've emailed me, please accept my apologies for not responding. I have literally had so many that it would be impossible for me to respond to everybody, and it would be unfair to only respond to some. Now, if you've read the title, I'm sure you'll have realised by now that yes, it's finally happened. The government has announced that the sale of internal combustion propelled motorcycles will be banned from a date that's yet to be determined in 2035. That's just 13 years from now. It sounds like a long time, but really, it's not. What is more worrying about this news is that the government actually announced this back in July and no one noticed. Again, it's a typical example of the government introducing legislation like this quietly, behind closed doors, under the radar, so they don't get any pushback from motorcyclists. Now, I've had a lot of questions from people both by email and in the comments sections on the various videos that I've produced on this ever-growing subject, and I'm going to try my best in this video to give some broad answers to sort of satisfy some of those questions. I've also had lots of comments from people saying, "Oh, stick to motorcycles and stay out of politics, I don't come here to listen to this." I have got absolutely no patience for people like that. If you are stupid enough not to be able to see that politics is very much intertwined with motorcycling at the moment, in fact, it's not a new thing. Politicians have always had their hooks into motorcycling because they neither understand or like bikes. It's as simple as that. So what I will say to those people that like to leave those sort of comments is it's probably best not to broadcast your stupidity publicly in the comments section. And another prominent comment that I keep getting is, why am I the only one on YouTube that's talking about this? Why have the big channels not mentioned it? Well, I'm going to try and be diplomatic with this one. My reason for running this channel is the welfare of bikers. It's the enjoyment of motorcycling and sharing that with other people. Yes, I do make a living from this channel, but the way the YouTube algorithms are set up, this sort of contentious subject does, without any shadow of a doubt, even if the videos get huge views, diminish your earning potential. The CPM rates, which is the rate by which you're paid for the adverts on the video, are about half what they would normally be for a video about a custom part or a pair of boots or whatever. I would hazard a guess that those larger channels don't want to see their profits go down, so they're steering clear of this subject. And I think your best bet, if you really want to know the answer to that question, is pop along to those other channels and ask them why they're not mentioning it. It's not a question that I can answer. Not definitively anyway. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you will know that the UK government are putting in place basically 3 pieces of legislation relating to motor vehicles, which all affect motorcycles. In fact, I would go so far as to say that these pieces of legislation will make motorcycling as we know it extinct within the next 10 or 13 years. Motorcycle touring will become a thing of the past. It just won't be possible anymore because bikes won't have the range. Motorcycles eventually will have telemetry boxes fitted. They'll also have speed limiters fitted. In the fullness of time, your car and your motorcycle will have the capacity to record and report to the powers that be where you have been, how fast you were travelling, whether or not you went through a red traffic light. In fact, eventually your motorcycle will have the capacity to report to the powers that be your style of riding, and they'll be able to use that information any way they see fit. And then on top of that, there's another set of legislation coming in that will ban you from making any modifications to your motorcycle or your car, even if that's just the addition of some better mirrors to allow better visibility behind you, or an improved seat so that you can ride with better comfort over long distances. And behind the scenes, the government is currently trying to change privacy legislation for electronic data so that they can make maximum use of that information that you generate. And as if all this wasn't bad enough, we've got organisations like the BMF, the British Motorcycling Federation, throwing motorcyclists under the bus at the most significant time in motorcycling history, when they really needed to come through for us. Now, I had a very long conversation with the chairman of the Motorcycle Action Group this morning on the telephone, Neil Liversidge, and we have loosely made plans to publish a video together so he can get Mag's action plan across. But for now, let's start at the beginning and explain to you what is happening. Right, back in 2017, Theresa May, who historically is the worst Prime Minister the UK has ever had, for political reasons wanted to form an alliance with the far left. Now, of course, the best way to get them on side was to demonstrate a willingness to get on board with the climate change issues. So she created some legislation to ban the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2040. Unfortunately, this political alliance never actually happened, but that legislation stayed there. She left, Boris Johnson came along, he picked up the baton and started to run with it. He changed the dates from 2040 to 2035, and then he changed it again from 2035 to 2030. So 8 years from now, it will be illegal to sell a motor car in the UK that is powered by a petrol or diesel engine. It means the switch over to electric vehicles. Now, the thing is, motorcycles were never mentioned. When Theresa May hashed this legislation together, they obviously just didn't think about motorcycles. There are only 1.1 million motorcycles on the road in the UK compared to the 30 odd million motor cars. So apparently they'd just been overlooked, but when Boris took over, someone obviously noticed the omission and started the ball rolling. But as we've seen historically with the ban on the sale of petrol cars, the setting of a date is not set in stone. It can be changed any time. Boris has moved it forward a decade just in the last year. So it's fair to assume that that could possibly happen with the deadline for motorcycles. I find it quite incredible that this legislation was introduced back in July and I missed it, because I regularly go on hunting expeditions for the latest news on what's going on. And it was actually from an article relating to similar legislation coming in the EU that reference had already been made to the banning of the sale of petrol motorcycles in 2035 in the UK. That's how I found out about it. Now, I'm not going to get dragged into a debate about climate change and whether it's real or imagined, because as far as I'm concerned, there's compelling evidence available to suit every viewpoint on this subject. There's no clear answer to it, and it does seem to me that as far as the media is concerned, you only get airtime if your views support the existence of climate change and you're willing to profess that it's been caused by humans. And I'm afraid any regime that operates in that manner automatically makes me sceptical and very suspicious. Now, of course, the big problem that we have with electric vehicles is number one, the cost, and number two, the range. Now, I think just about every motor car manufacturer is currently producing an electric vehicle. The first generation of electric vehicles, if you like. And it's easy to cherry pick examples to suit, any argument you want to make. But I drive a Mini, so I had a look at the Mini website. Now, Mini have 2 or 3 models available, the most basic one being the equivalent of the bog standard Mini Classic, which costs about £17,000. But the electric equivalent starts at £26,000. So that's as near as, damn it, a £10,000 premium because it's an electric car. And that kind of price increase is pretty typical across the board for all manufacturers that have an electric vehicle in the lineup. And the manufacturers of this car, Mini, say that it has a range of 145 miles. Seriously, 145 miles? Well, actually, most of the tests that I've read, the reviews on that car, say that it's in reality only 115 to 126 miles. And if you're charging it up from home, it will take you anywhere from 6 to 12 hours to fully recharge the battery. And even if you have access to a public fast charge unit, it still takes 30 minutes. Which means this car is never going to be suitable for travelling long distances, let alone touring. Because even if we accept the manufacturer's stated range of 145 miles, that would mean a trip from Land's End to John O'Groats would require 6 stops for charging. So, presuming on each of those stops you would have access to a fast charger, which isn't guaranteed, that would require a total of 3 hours charging your car on that journey. Now, okay, I know there are cars that will do substantially more mileage than that, some of them over 400 miles to a single charge. But in order to get that kind of range from the current iteration of such vehicles, you need to be spending between £40,000 and £60,000, which isn't exactly within the reach of your average working man. And then, of course, we've got a host of other problems that are not really made that public. The fact that in order to make an electric car, you create 70% more greenhouse gases in order to manufacture it. Which means your brand spanking new Mini Electric needs to do 70,000 miles before it actually becomes a zero emissions vehicle. By which time those batteries will be nearing end of life, so you'll be looking at a bill of about, well, best case, £5,000 for a set of replacement batteries, which would basically put that vehicle back to square one as far as zero emissions are concerned. So these vehicles are unlikely in the real world to reach zero emissions status. Now, you translate this over to motorcycles, and all the same limitations are going to be in place. It's not going to be any better. They are going to cost a lot more. A touring holiday around the continent is going to be impossible to achieve, and that motorcycle is unlikely to reach zero emissions status during its use. Now, what usually happens at this point in the conversation is people start telling me, but yeah, the technology is going to improve immeasurably. We're going to have new technology, and that technology is going to get cheaper. Well, for a start, I'll tell you this, you cannot base an argument on technology that doesn't currently exist. Back in the 1970s, I was told that during my lifetime I'll be piloting a nuclear-powered flying car and I'd be taking my holidays on the moon, but that never happened. And as for the technology getting cheaper, it may well do, but do you really think the manufacturers are going to pass that on to you? When was the last time a car or motorcycle manufacturer released a new improved model and reduced the price in the process? That never happens, because the way business and manufacturing works, They use those improvements as leverage to get more cash out of you. The price goes up, it doesn't come down. I hate to break it to you, but that is naive, wishful thinking. Now, I've often been told in the comments section how wonderful electric cars are and how wonderful electric motorcycles are going to be. But let's just put things into perspective. The modern world has grown up around motorised transport. The population has grown to the point where it is impossible for everyone to live a 10 or 15 minute walk away from work. A huge proportion of the population have moved out to the suburbs. Public transport has been neglected for decades and isn't fit for purpose, so people need personal motorised transport to get to work. Yet a huge proportion of common working people are not going to be able to afford this technology. I would imagine the most common way of getting access to it is going to be through some sort of PCP or hire scheme, but not everyone is going to have access to that, especially people on low incomes. So how are they going to get to work? This is a problem that no one seems to want to address. Youngsters just leaving school or poor working families on low incomes aren't going to have access to employment because they're not going to have any practical means to get to that place of employment. There are a huge geographical area of rural locations in the UK that have no train lines and an infrequent bus service. So those people are not going to have the same employment prospects as those, for example, that live in London. They're going to be unemployable and the economy is going to take a huge hit as a result. Now, I'm all for taking the strain off this planet and lessening our impact on it, but it needs to be done in a sustainable, sensible manner. A manner that can be managed in such a way that it's not going to throw a huge proportion of the population into a lifestyle that was last seen during the early Victorian era, because that's what we're looking at. And even taking into account that these electric vehicles are going to be cheaper on the used market, what you've got to take into consideration is the fact that the batteries will be reaching end of life, and low income families won't be in a position to buy these vehicles knowing that they've got a huge bill for new batteries to contend with shortly after purchase. It is complete folly for the government to mandate that technology has to catch up with legislation. Technology development doesn't work like that. It never has and it never will. That's that bit out of the way. What about this anti-tamper legislation? As you should know by now, the government has mandated that some new legislation is coming into force in about 2024. It's not been set in stone as yet. Now, just over a month ago, I made a video alerting you to this and pointed everyone in the direction of a public consultation survey that the Department for Transport had published, urging everybody to put their thoughts to the government to let them know what we think about it. Now, the initial proposal for this legislation is that it will make it an offence for you to make any alterations to your motor car or your motorcycle. So that will include things like changing your mirrors, changing your seat. You might be limited on your tyre choice. You're certainly not going to be able to make your motorcycle your own. And if any parts wear out, break, or are damaged in an accident, you're going to be limited to buying OEM parts only as replacements. And rumblings are that this is going to be made a retrospective legislation, so any bike on the road at the moment that's been modified will have to be changed back or you're committing offences. Once again, the government took advantage of us being distracted by this pandemic in order to slide this proposed legislation and the accompanying public consultation through under the radar, because they didn't really want too many people to know about it. After all, they didn't want anyone objecting because that might spoil their plans. Now, normally these consultation periods last for 12 weeks, but they wanted to hedge the bets So they cut that short to 8 weeks, and then when they realised they were getting a big kickback as a result of people like me and Mag and some of the motorcycle magazines, they called a meeting with the BMF and one or two other organisations to explain to them that we'd got it all wrong and we'd misunderstood what this proposed legislation was going to do, and that really it was just about stopping people from altering the emissions control systems on the motorcycles and motorcars. Now, that's not what the proposed legislation said. It made it quite clear in that the wording that this would include any part on any motor vehicle. It wasn't just specific to emissions control, and everybody saw through this ploy, except the BMF, who publicly proclaimed to all the members and any motorcyclist who would pay them any attention that we should breathe a sigh of relief and we shouldn't worry about it. It's not going to cause us any problems. Now, this behaviour on the part of the BMF to me is either a demonstration that they are extremely stupid and feckless, or they were intentionally assisting the government in slipping this legislation through with the minimum of objections from the public. I don't actually know which of those two things it is, but what is very clear is that their statement to the public after that meeting was complicit in assisting the government by persuading people not to object to what the government was proposing. And in doing so, in my opinion, the BMF has thrown the British motorcyclist under the bus. Now, coincidentally, at about the time this meeting took place, the Department for Transport also cut the consultation period down by a further 2 weeks in order to stem the flow of objections from motorcyclists. So it actually only lasted 6 weeks in place of the usual 12 weeks. And would you believe it, 2 days after that consultation period finished, the BMF publicly proclaimed that they were totally against this proposed legislation. It had far-reaching implications to motorcyclists and that we needed to fight it. And in that proclamation, they made no reference or apology to their previous behaviour of dissuading people from objecting during the consultation period when they had a chance to do so. It's almost as though they believe no one will notice what they've done. They have intentionally dissuaded potentially thousands of motorcyclists from voicing their objections by falsely putting the minds at rest. I've never had a high opinion of the BMF, but I think I can honestly say now they are not fit for purpose. Now, this is an organisation that takes subscriptions or donations from motorcyclists in order to fight their corner for them, and here they've clearly compromised our motorcycle lifestyles for whatever reasons. I mean, I honestly can't get my head around why they've done it. One thing is clear, however, they are not on our side and they are not going to help us. If you are a BMF member, you need to be asking the BMF to explain itself and what it's done here. Or better still, cancel your subscription, tell them why you've cancelled it and join MAG. MAG are not perfect, they have let us down occasionally, but they've never let us down in a situation of this magnitude, and they've definitely done more good for motorcyclists over the years than BMF ever have. I honestly can't believe they've done it and then been so blasé afterwards. I found it incredible. Right, lastly, and I'll try to be quick about this, I know time's running on, telemetry boxes and speed limiters on our motorcycles coming into force sometime after 2024. Again, it's coming to motor cars first. Motorcycles are being given a little bit of extra time so that the necessary technology can be invented to make it happen. Now, this is not just limited to the UK, the EU are also implementing this, and basically it's down to the introduction of electric vehicles, sold to us, the motoring public, under the guise of motoring safety. From next year, speed limiters will be fitted to any new model that's introduced to the market. This is cars just for the moment, but motorcycles are to follow. They have specifically been mentioned in this legislation. And all new motor cars from 2024 will have to have this technology fitted. Now, initially, you will be able to override the speed limiter, but this is only a facility that will be available to you temporarily. Once we've got used to it, they will stop the override feature, basically. The most worrying part of this, though, is the telemetry boxes. 5% of all tax revenue in the UK comes from duties that we pay on fuel. And of course, with the advent of electric vehicles, they're going to lose that 5% of fuel duty. So the government's going to need some way of taxing our use of electric vehicles. Now, all vehicles have a sort of telemetry system fitted in via their ECU, and it's a simple matter of making some tweaks and adjustments to get this to work for the government, because this will allow them to be able to put a charge per mile of our use on the roads. Most vehicles are now connected to the internet, new vehicles anyway, either independently or via our mobile phones. So these are going to be a perfect solution to the government's money problems. It's basically going to introduce a pay-as-you-go motoring system where eventually the money will just be deducted from your bank account on a monthly basis. But I personally, and this is just my belief, I personally believe it's going to go a little bit further than that. You see, the government is currently seeking to change the data protection laws so that they have a greater access to digital information than they currently enjoy. That is, access to digital information without your permission or a court order. Now, as part of this entire system with speed limiters, these telemetry boxes are going to be rigged up to GPS. They're talking about cameras being fitted to your motorcycle. They say that it's in order to make the speed limiters work efficiently, but I think it goes a little bit deeper than that, because it gives them a system whereby your vehicle can report you for any misdemeanors that you commit on the road. For instance, overriding your speed limiter and breaking the speed limit, going through a red light, failing to stop at a junction, riding around with underinflated tyres, or a light that's not working correctly. This of course will all be at our expense, because it will be included in the retail price of the vehicle when you buy it, but it's going to allow the government to cut back on our already understaffed police forces, and your vehicle will have the ability to self-report any misdemeanors that take place on the road while you're in control of that vehicle, creating the ability where your vehicle will report your misdemeanors. You'll get a notification by email and the fine automatically taken from your bank account, and points put on your licence if they're deemed to be required. And of course, one of the reasons that anti-tamper legislation is being put in place is to stop people overriding this. As we all know, this kind of technology is at best unreliable. Some insurance companies are issuing these to clients in order that they can reduce their insurance premiums by driving carefully and providing proof that they're driving carefully. And there have been multiple cases of these telemetry boxes false reporting. A case in point is one young man whose story hit the headlines last week. He has a telemetry box fitted in his Volkswagen. It claimed that it had an accident that in fact he hadn't had. And when it was investigated further, they discovered that this accident took place 300 miles off the coast of Morocco in the middle of the ocean. And not only that, the accident occurred 27 years before this young man was born. and 37 years before the car that it had the accident in was actually built. And this is the technology that our government is pushing upon us in the name of road safety. Now, by all means, take my opinions in this video with a pinch of salt and make up your own minds, but make no mistake, this proposed legislation, everything mentioned in this video, is very real, and it is going to be put in place if we don't object. The government seems to be trying to influence our behaviour by using scare tactics. Climate change being one of those scare tactics, convincing us that the world is going to end if we don't adopt all these new technologies, irrespective of how detrimental it's going to be to our lives. It's a very useful tool. And of course, the elephant in the room is that most of this legislation has been slipped in under the radar during this current pandemic. We've had 2 years of hell, been placed under house arrest for months on end, and generally having our lives restricted in a way that wasn't even seen during World War II. Now, don't get me wrong, throughout the pandemic I've been happy to comply because I thought I was helping other people as well as myself. But the emergence of this new Omicron variant leads me to believe that this is a sword of Damocles that our governments are reluctant to let go of. An instrument of fear that distracts us from what they're doing and allows them to get away with doing things normally they wouldn't be able to get away with. I've seen newspaper headlines telling me that this is the most deadly variant of the virus that we've seen yet. Once again, we've had politicians reinstate COVID restrictions on us, even telling us not to worry about Christmas. They'll do all the worrying for us. Yet, if you take the time to read up on this virus, or should I say this new variant of the virus, the doctors in South Africa that have actually had first-hand experience of it are telling us that it's an unusual virus, it has unusual symptoms and characteristics, but it's the mildest form of the virus that they've encountered so far. The World Health Organization has divulged that so far it's caused no deaths. In fact, there have been no hospital admissions with this variant. And it even got to the point this morning while I was editing this that the WHO released a press release publicly worldwide telling Western governments to stop scaremongering because there is nothing to worry about with this variant. Make of that what you will, but the facts are there to be read if you care to look into it. It just seems to me that various Western governments have enjoyed the additional power that this pandemic has awarded to them. They're reluctant to let go of it, and they're even prepared to lie to us so that they can perpetuate this situation of enhanced control of the population, allowing them to slip this ridiculous legislation into being without consultation or pushback from us. I watched the number 10 Downing Street press conference about this new variant last week, like a lot of other people did. And instead of reassuring the public by giving them all the information, they purposely withheld information, concentrating purely on the negative aspects and continuing to ramp up the fear. It's clear that their relationship with us has become toxic. It's become an abusive relationship. As I said in a previous video, I simply do not recognise the world that we're living in at the moment. Right, I'm going to have to leave it there. I could go on, but you know, this video's gone on way too long as it is. I'm not going to go through my normal spiel. I'll let you go. I'll be back on Friday, so until then, please ride safely, and I'll see you soon.